and spotlight. Hello everyone, my name is Bill Swainson, and on behalf of the Litfest Board of Trustees, I'd like to welcome you to the first Litfest Autumn Weekend, which, like our main festival in March, is entirely online and entirely free. Like many of you, we'd like to get back to live events and are currently exploring the best way to do this so that we can continue to be inclusive and accessible and continue to reach our greatly increased and ever more diverse audiences. The hybrid format of live and live streamed events does look like the best way forward. But for that, we have to raise the funds, which we're in the middle of doing. As a registered charity with no regular Arts Council funding, if Litfest is able to go on creating exciting projects and events right here in Lancaster, bringing the best in world literature and ideas to the northwest of England and to our international audiences, we are going to need your help. Towards the end of the event, a donate button will appear on your screen. Please do make use of it or visit our website afterwards, www.litfest.org. Every donation will help us to build towards that hybrid future where we can be together both digitally and physically, as suits us best. So, why an Orchim Weekend? Well, we're building Litfest's capacity so that we can run more projects all year round. Projects like the poetry map, the documentary films, the discussion panels, the Big Read campaign, and the writing workshops of Litfest 21. And of course, when we realized during Litfest 2021 that 4 of our local authors, Sarah Hall, Polly Atkin, Kim Moore, and Karen Lloyd, all had new books coming out in September and October, it seemed only the right and obvious thing to do. In addition, we co-created the Poetry Mosaic with poets of all ages from the Northwest and launched it on National Poetry Day with a great reading hosted by Hannah Hodgson. And tonight, we welcome 2 poets from the Northwest, Polly Atkin and Kim Moore, to read from their dazzling new collections. Polly and Kim will read for just over 20 minutes each, and we will leave time for a Q&A. So please type your questions for Polly and Kim into the question box at the bottom of your screen rather than in the chat, and Polly and Kim will answer them at the end of the reading. So now to our first reader. Polly Atkin lives in Cumbria. Her first poetry collection, Basic Nest Architecture, appeared from Seren in 2017 and was longlisted for the Michael Murphy Memorial Prize. She is also the author of a number of pamphlets, including Shadow Dispatches, which won the Dyslexia Pamphlet Prize, and has also written a biography called Recovering Dorothy, The Hidden Life of Dorothy Wordsworth. She's working on a memoir exploring place, belonging, and disability, and you can hear her terrific Walking Solo podcast on the Litfest website. Tonight, she's going to read from her outstanding new collection, Much with Body, published by Seren, and which has a distinctly aquatic feel and contains at its heart a set of found poems that draw on the journals of Dorothy Wordsworth. Please give a very warm digital welcome to Polly Atkin.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Litfest, for having us. It's such a delight to be doing this, and thank you all for being here with us as well. I'm very jealous of all of you with your chocolates and your PJs. It's exactly the best way to be doing it on a dark night. So hopefully you can all see some poems now, as well as my face. I might be quite little. Yeah, brilliant. So I'm kind of going to read in order from the book. Here's the book. It's got this beautiful cover by Nancy Farmer, which is from a painting of hers called Hiatus. And there's a kind of swimmer floating in it. And I found out from Twitter, I think, or maybe it was Facebook, that swimmer is actually a real Cumbrian person. Nancy isn't based in Cumbria, but she does come here to swim sometimes. So it's really lovely to have that there. But I'm going to start with a kind of January poem. So this is partly in honor of Kim, because it's got wolves in it, although they're not real wolves. They are wolves in relation to the full wolf moon in January 2020. And it's a poem about having a kind of presentiment of something bad coming, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, of course. So this is one of my last pre-pandemic poems, I suppose. Full wolf moon. Everyone everywhere is talking about the moon, the full wolf moon, supersized with probability. The New Year eclipse, eclipsed. We have no moon here, only rain, rain coming out of a sodden dark, a bristly dark scattered with raindrops, raindrops as stars. The matted pelt of the wolf night, the wolf sky, the wolf clouds. No wolf, no moon, no wolf. That's how it works in the films and the books. The sky concurs, growls far back at the year as it crouches at the edge of the clearing, creeps forward on its haunches, low in the bracken, ready to take us down. So from that cheery start, the book just gets happier. It's great. So the second poem I'm going to read for you is the second poem in the book, and it's called Hunting the Stag, and started with a really amazing experience I had with a red stag, and kind of spun out from that. No stags get harmed in the making of this poem, don't worry. Hunting the Stag. The stag doesn't visit because you want him to. It doesn't work like that. He doesn't materialize when you go out to look for him with the good camera this time, coiled around your neck, and your sheepskin hat on with the ear flaps on. He does not trot down from the hill to greet you, tamed by your need. He has his own matters to attend to. What did you expect? You know what you become when you're like this. Too much, too much. Scanning for movement in the undergrowth, beady and atavistic. When you press your palm on the stone gatepost and wish your wish is selfish. The heron passes asking, what are you missing when you only look for big things? A selfish wish never comes good. He is higher than you can walk today, or deeper. You cannot make him come to you. Not the great stag with his rustling mane, not even the small roe with his sapling antlers. He will be standing in the shadow of the side street when you lock up the shop. He will be standing in the shadow of the house when you stay out too long, talking on the path through the trees about lost till the fells dissolved into dusk and push you down to him. You will feel him before you hear him. You will hear him before you see him. He will seem to step out of the walls of your house or through them. You will think he is waiting for you, but you are incidental. He will go to a place you haven't worked for years, wade into the lake, bristling as swans ripple out from his image. Don't want so much. Come down from the woods. Empty your pockets of pine cones and sticks. Light the fire. It doesn't work like that. Light the candles. Nothing does. And continuing with animals, the next poem I'm going to read is called Bear in the Library, and is something that I wrote when I was in residence at Gladstone's library a few years ago. And I was thinking about it again as our friend and Cumbrian author Katie Hale has just been in residence at Gladstone. So I've been thinking about my February there. And this is my bear. And it quotes and misquotes from a few other poets' poems, including Emma Jones, Chrissy Williams, and Varney Capildeo, and things they've written about bears and not bears. When you first hear it, you are not sure whether the bear is in your ear or the library, whether the bear is in your chest or the library. When it growls again, The low, unthinking growl of a bear lost in its reading, you spot it. You try to stay calm. It is only studying. It is only natural for a bear to be growling a little as it turns the pages, shuffling its haunches under the desk in the library on a snowy night. In the cafe, a woman asks, "Are you sure it was a bear and not a tiger? Pouncy?" You are sure. A bear is a bear, inescapable animal. Although the last wild bear in this country was killed before the 10th century, like all great warriors, and it's been illegal since 1835 to keep a bear for baiting, to bait a bear, to keep a bear for dancing since 1911. Everyone could use a bear sometimes, but there's nothing worse than a bear in the library breathing at my side when you're trying to write and a poem sticks in your jaw rewritten for the bear. No one could say how the bear got into the library. Poets are no longer allowed to take bears into libraries or lectures, not since 1809, or enroll them in university courses, whatever their area of interest. This bear is entirely in charge of its program of study. It is free or feral. Who am I to demand it not growl? My love once lived on a road that was once called Bearwood Lane. I would visit him there, where the bears and their keepers were kept, close to the square where they fought and danced. The city I had known became a place of bears, of the persecution of bears, of poets raised amongst bears, of people who lived amongst bears, happy to hurt them. We gazed at bear jars in the Castle Museum, their glossy, salt-glazed faces behind glass, muzzled, learned how they looked like they're cuddling a cub, but are wrestling a fighting dog. You pour from the body of the bear, drink from its head. They are chained together. This is local and particular. In the library, the lamps are lit. It is snowing lightly, but not sticking. You try to be pleased that the bear is reading. Good for you, bear. Except for the way it moves in the stacks, uncanny on two legs, the way it turns the key in the door with its paws after dinner. Sure, it has every right to be there, browsing the ancient copse of the shelves. It's all completely true story. Since it's October, I thought I'd read something a bit spooky as well. So this is Borders Gothic, and it is inspired by a map of Cumbrian boggles made by Alan Cleaver. And if you know anything about boggles, you know a boggle is not just for Halloween, it's for all year. But these are some of them. Borders Gothic. You will meet it as a corner you cannot turn, a gate flung open, a muffled struggle off-road in the woody murk where the old track comes under mulch and brambles. You will be a traveller in the midst, alone. It will throw itself into your bag as a weight so heavy you cannot go on. It will block your path in the body of a bone-white calf, or a lady, eyes like swollen moons, its voice the splash of stones thrown in deep water. It will howl. It will sit at your feet and sink through the bog of the tarmac with a glug like a rock or a woman being dropped in a mire. It will cry 3 times from the shore. It will carry its coffin or its head or its child in its hands. It will follow you home. It will make you promises. You will try to rid your house of it, the radiant boy of it, heirloom drab of it. You will take it, still screaming, to sea and drown it. You will bury it day after day and find it always back where it started, its lamp casting light through every window, its small skull shrieking, I know, I know, I know. So moving on from those kinds of ghosts, as Bill said, there's a sequence of, or a chunk of this book, which is drawn from Dorothy Wordsworth's unpublished bridal journals. So I'm going to read a couple of little bits of that. There's one really long poem called Dorothy's Reign, which is kind of 7.5 minutes of mostly the word rain, but I'm going to spare you that tonight and read some of the smaller pieces from this sequence, Much with Body, that gives the title to the collection. So this is the first piece of it. Very beautifully and glad, rain will come, but only a small shower, convalescent in spite of rain. I was fatigued and weak, and though in little pain, could not see past, not a drop of rain, and rain before night, and from the day to the present, clear, with a few large busy shapes of clouds, and us, dullish and turbulent, and the rains moderate. I begin to read the life, the sum of my reading, fair or nearly so. I was tired and only. You can tell I always end up reading my favorite bits of this, which are to do with my favorite of her phrases as well. And they're collaged together to try and mean something different. So I'm not trying to ventriloquize Dorothy or talk about her experience. I'm trying to kind of use them to do something slightly different. Cold sun by bright big clouds grows calmer. Sat some hours with the rain, stormy rain. I am wonderfully re-established and stormy, a conclusive article against reform. Cast out the same parts of our venerable bright moon. I am not able to hear prayers. Large dazzling clouds visit me, amiable, blustering, letters from a lost dismal house. In night, tremendous showers streaming down my windows, tolerable, but very dark. Much harmed by sudden mornings, we are again fixed in my still helpless state, in convulsions and much with body. And some of these I've been thinking about a lot this last month, I have to say. The rain will not depart from its accustomed strongholds. A glittering shower travels over us. I have been sticking leafy green twigs of elder among my spring and winter flowers. My garden, all of the seasons visited by bees, taking no rest. Rain and the dismal labor of walls fills the rooms with the road, advances with speed, small red roses and green small leaf. But that is beautiful, solitary at my request. A sweet gleamy morning supplied me with various flowers till my legs bear me up no longer, traveller. Poor thing, she has a weaning expectation. I do not venture out. And the last one of these that I'm going to share. I rose, disappointed, tired and in pain. There is a forlorn, almost branch when I lie on my bed I would not part with. Death, or perhaps a mistake, in excellent health and spirits, at my door, but I could not see her. I was very poorly all evening and could not have journeyed upstairs. And then I think I've got 3 more poems I'm going to read. And the first one is one of 2 that are 2 of a sequence of 3. The 2 are in the latest issue of Poetry Review. And the 3 poems that are scattered through the last section of the book mash up part of a poem with language that comes from the pain catastrophizing scale, which is one of many scales that are used by medical professionals to essentially to try and convince you that you're causing your own pain in some ways. And you'll see as the language kind of appears through this. So there is some quite strange psychological language in here. So this is gravitas rumination subscale. Every point mass attracts every single other point mass by a force acting along the line intersecting. Can I keep on falling interminably? The force is proportional to the product of the masses and inversely proportioned to the square of the distance between them. The sound that falls from my mouth like a plumb line when my knee hits the ground. The crack of a thin bone placed under pressure from the right direction or slap of palm on ice. This is the law. I anxiously want. I am in a mass point falling, blood sloshing down the slouching stocking of a body. Any time I let it act on me, inciting it by standing, invoking it any time I rise. I cannot seem to keep it out of my mind. Are we going to rise up and fall down again, sickened and dizzy with the dream of rebellion, counter the tyranny of downward motion of the planet's dense core? I keep thinking about how badly I want. This is the relationship between the motion of the moon and the motion of a body falling. If the bodies in question have spatial extent, if the bodies are in question, if the bodies have attraction as all massive bodies must do for each other, for the sky and the center, it is unavoidable. I keep thinking how badly I want the pain to stop. I anxiously, I catastrophically, I massively, I subject to scalar gravity, I stand and let go. I kiss the earth. This is serious. I keep thinking about how much it hurts. And the next poem I'm going to read was inspired by a conversation. I have one distance learning master's student at the moment, an Irish writer called Brian Layden, who is a fantastic writer. And we have these great conversations about his work. And at one point when we were talking about the creative process, he was talking about the film The Red Shoes, and said that you hope that your creative life is a long dance. So this kind of comes out of that, and another conversation I had about what poems are and how they come to you or don't. And it's got a little epigraph from Don Patterson. Dear God, poor Dufu, I thought it's the poetry again. This is how it starts. The shoes dance towards you, about you, skittish as a deer you meet at twilight at the brink of the woods, who seem to be waiting for you to follow the path they've beaten through the scrub. The way they pause, turn to you, watch till you move to move on, and so you follow, glowing with stealth like the moon. And if the moon is huge as a pool light in the night window of the lake, you can't be blamed if your body tips to its gravity, tumbles into its luminous mouth and through it. This is how it gets you. You write because you have to. You write until it hurts in the bones and the tendons of your hand, under the covers after lights out, under the desk when you should be attending to other lessons, your fingers ink-stained and bent to requirements of the pen. Long after you switch to computer from paper, your hand retains the callous cushion of the pen rest on your middle digit. How it pushed the distal phalange away from the rest of you, marking its own direction. You think this sign will be with you always, but 1 year it's gone. No warning. The body resets, recovers, finds its root like water, the law of least resistance. You write to live. You try to live well, to keep moving, to watch from the tree line, to make the fall a long dance, to come back down from the trees to your fireside, your solid stone walls, week after week, year after year. To remember the moon is a portal, to not reach when you don't want to travel. The shoes inch toward you, nuzzle your ankles, warm breath, soft tongues. Of course, you put them on. You let them put you on. And I'm going to finish with a poem that's dedicated to my dear friend Eileen Punn, and she's kind of in it. It's called Sailing by Silver Ship, and it's the last poem in the book. The moon is a ship, and we are sailing in her. How can we not talk about her? She glistens, and we glisten. She throws out nets of herself, trailing clouds like weeds, and we walk them as bridges to the stars, arm in arm, singing. And the stars themselves are glistening, aren't they? Like specks of quartz in dark rock, spangling the great unknowable expanse as it squeezes into this particular wedge of night. The swell of this road, the dark fell sea. Soon we will be there, sister, wavering from the deck of the one you call Dipper, so big we can sit in it. No, so big it will carry us away. Thank you.
I'm having my own technical hitch here. Oh, good, it's worked. I couldn't get at the microphone symbol. It kept being covered up by something else. Polly, thank you. That was an extraordinary reading, very moving, otherworldly, and wonderfully strange. And I think it'll take me a long time to get the stag out of my head. So I'm now going to introduce Kim, but before we do, because I don't want her to be troubled by the business with the size of the type and so on, we're just going to try an experiment. So will you bear with us while we spotlight Kim? And Kim, would you share your poem so you can, Inez, if you get rid of me and Polly temporarily.
I'm sharing it now.
Yeah, the difficulty, Kim, is in order to get the text to a legible size, your picture needs to be small. This is I wouldn't call it a feature, but it's a drawback of Crowdcast, which has many other useful qualities. Is
that legible?
Can you work with that, Kim?
Yeah.
Okay, then I think everyone will have to live with that. So let's leave the settings as they are now. Inez, if you could switch, just temporarily switch Polly's camera off. Yeah, and you can, and in a minute you can take mine away. I just want to, okay, so we're now back on track. I'm sorry, everyone. It is frustrating. Crowdcast are doing some improvements. I do hope that one of them will be that you can share your screen and have a decent sized picture of the person reading, and also have legible type without too much difficulty. But that's where we are. That's where we are at the moment. So let's go ahead with the prospect that when we do the Q&A, you'll be able to see everyone at a decent size. So Kim Moore also lives and works in Cumbria. Her first full-length collection, The Art of Falling, published by Seren, won the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize. She also won a New Writing North Award, an Eric Gregory Award, and the Geoffrey Dermer Prize. In 2020, she was a judge for both the National Poetry Competition and the 3 Forward Prizes. She is part of Versopolis, a European-funded scheme to promote poets and festivals across Europe. She has a doctorate from Manchester Metropolitan University, is co-director of the excellent Kendal Poetry Festival, and earlier this year, she led Litfest's New Writing Northwest Poetry Workshop. Tonight, she's going to read from her brilliantly titled new collection, All the Men I Never Married, also published by Seren. And like both books, Polly's and Kim's, you can buy direct from our online bookshop, complete with a signed bookplate, and support Litfest at the same time. So please give a warm digital welcome to Kim Moore. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for that lovely introduction, and it's great to read with Polly and hear those new poems, which I'm really excited about reading the whole book now. Yes, that was fantastic. Right, I'm going to reshare my screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see. And I'll try and scroll sensibly so that you can keep seeing it. So this is a kind of preface poem that I don't read very often, but I thought as it's the first official reading from the book, I will try reading it. So it hasn't got a title. We are coming under cover of darkness, with our strawberry marks, our familiars, our third nipples, our ill-mannered bodies, our childhoods spent hobbled like horses, where we were told to keep our legs closed, where we sat in the light of a window and posed and waited for the makers of the world to tell us again how a woman is made. We are arriving from the narrow places, from the spaces we were given, with our curses and our spells and our solitude, with our potions we swallow to shrink as small as insects or stretch us into giants. For yes, there are giants amongst us, we must warn you. There will be riots. We're carrying all that we know about silence as we return from the forests and towers, unmaking ourselves, stepping from the pages of books, from the eye of the camera, from the cages we built for each other, the frames of paintings, from every place we were lost and afraid in. We stand at the base of our own spines and watch tree turn to bone and climb each vertebrae to crawl back into our minds. We've been out of our minds all this time. Our bodies saying no, we were not born for this, dragging the snare and the wire behind us. Was that scrolling? Hold on, I need to go back to the other screen because I'm on another screen. Was that scrolling okay for everyone? Did I keep it at about the right speed for you to see? Can someone put in the chat whether it worked? Because I can't see what you can see. Yes, brilliant. Okay, thanks, Polly. Okay. Yes, so I'll carry on. So I'm going to also read in order, but the book All the Men I Never Married, it's all of the poems. None of the poems have titles; they're just numbered, 1 through to 48, which is great. Anyone who also writes knows sometimes it can be a pain to think of titles, but it also amused me to write lots of poems about men and just give them a number. So this is All the Men I Never Married, number 1. There was the boy I met on the park who tasted of humbugs and wore a mustard yellow jumper, and the kickboxer with beautiful long brown hair that he tied with a band at the nape of his neck, and the one who had a constant ear infection, so I always sat on his left, and the guy who worked in an office and could only afford to fill up his car with £2 worth of petrol, and the trumpet player I loved from the moment I saw him, dancing to the Rolling Stones, and the guy who smoked weed and got more and more paranoid, whose fingers flickered and danced when he talked, and the one whose eyes were 2 pieces of winter sky, and a music producer, long-legged and full of opinions, and more trumpet players, one who was too short and not him, one who was too thin and not him. Are you judging me yet? Are you surprised? Let me tell you of the ones I never kissed, or who never kissed me. The trombonist I went drinking with, how we lay twice a week in each other's beds like 2 unlit candles. We were not for each other, and in this we were wise. We were only moving through the world together for a time. There was a double bassist who stood behind me and angled the body of his bass into mine and shadowed my hands on its neck, and all I could feel was heat from his skin and the lightest breath, and even this might have been imagined. I want to say to them now, though all we are to each other is ghosts, once you were all that I thought of. When I whisper your names, it isn't a curse or a spell or a blessing. I'm not mourning your passing or calling you here. This is something harder, like walking alone in the dusk and the leaves. This is the naming of trees. This is a series of flames. This is watching you all disappear. So that poem was really where the book started, although I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know I was writing another book. I was in that period of time after the first book when you think you're never going to write again, because you've said everything that you could ever think to say. And then I was just, I think an ex-boyfriend had annoyed me, and I thought I'm going to write a list of ex-boyfriends, and wrote this poem. And then I thought, oh, I could write a poem. They could each get a poem to themselves, lucky creatures. And then it kind of escalated from there to be 48. And they ended up, I started thinking, well, like I could put any poem with a man in, could be in All the Men I Never Married. And then the book started to become more about experiences of sexism interspersed with these poems about female desire, and then how the two sometimes connect together. So this next one is All the Men I Never Married, number 6. Like probably many people, I've been thinking a lot about Sarah Everard in the last few weeks, and the awful thing that happened to her with the police officer, and thinking about my own experiences with the police. I've obviously never had anything even remotely as awful as that, but I believe sexism is a structure, which I first read about in Sarah Ahmed's work. And I think this poem, I was trying to write about how that structure functions. This is actually, the you in the poem this is something that happened to my twin sister. All the men I never married, number 6. That a man approached you in a nightclub, that you were polite at first, then turned your back, that he insisted on giving you his number, that you put it in your pocket, that you danced with your friend all night, that he stood and watched, that you were drinking tequila, that you licked salt from the back of your hand, that he was waiting outside, that he grabbed your arm and spun you round, that you snapped, that you've always had a temper, that you were not afraid, that you swung your fist and clipped his jaw, that he kicked you between the legs, that he shouted, "I will end you," that you fell to the pavement, that he tried to kick you again, that a bouncer came and held him back, that he shouted, "I will end you, I will end you, I will end you," that the police were called, that he vanished into the night, that you were taken to the station, that he turned up with his lawyer, that he turned up with his father, that you still hadn't sobered up, that he was smirking, that it was Freshers' Week, that you were in pain, that it was hard to explain about his number in your pocket, that now you were afraid, that you were advised not to press charges, that you hit him first, that this all happened many years ago, that you laugh about it now, that you say, well, I shouldn't have hit him, that I both agree and disagree with this statement, that being our bodies in public is a dangerous thing, that being in public is a dangerous thing, that our bodies are dangerous things. So this is a pair of poems. I'm going to read one after the other. The kind of what I think of the female desire poem, and then the kind of sexism that you get in response, or that I got in response to it. But it's a little bit lighter than the last one. So all the men I never married, number 11. Once I knew a man who thought he knew everything. I often returned from work to find him asleep in my bed. It was like the sun had slipped itself between the sheets, or a lion, or something else born golden and sure of itself. Even though I knew all the stories about finding people in your bed, how it always ended badly, the 3 bears, the little girl with the red cape, what could I do but climb in beside him? He must have spent hours shaving his chest and back so that women like me could slide along him, as if we were bodies of water, and he the dry and thirsty earth. The man who thought he knew everything never learnt that he didn't, and I realised too late. This was why he was the way he was, as if he'd been touched and turned to gold by a foolish, laughing king. All the Men I Never Married, number 12. After the reading, a man waits around to tell me the poem I read about a beautiful man who thought he knew everything was objectifying men. How would it feel if the gender of the protagonist was reversed, he says triumphantly. I reply that it would feel like most other love poems in the course of human history. He says, aha, so this is really a very ordinary subject. I say yes, if you discount subversion and poetic tradition and female desire. More accurately, I only get to subversion and poetic tradition and female before he interrupts me to tell me how disappointed he is, as I'm a better writer than this, wasting my talent making cheap shots about men. The man in my poem does spend the whole poem naked, so maybe he is a little bit objectified, but I like him that way. I start to write a poem about the opinionated man who is busy shaking his head at my misunderstanding of beautiful men and their complex desires, which I've only skimmed over in my original poem by not giving my man a voice of his own, not allowing him to tell his own story. I will need to make a general and sweeping statement about men, but he interrupts again. Isn't the man in your poem a bit one-dimensional, he opines? Can't you make him more interesting? Just trying to be helpful, he says, holding his hands up like two little flags, like two dishcloths, like two dead moles hung on a fence. I reply, no, I can't. That is the best thing about him. Or maybe I'm just wishing I said that. Maybe I just smiled, nodded my head. I feel guilty about that poem, but I also think it's funny. I'm assuming you're all still there with me because I can't see the screen. So some of the men in the book are not exes or random strangers. This is a friend, a very good friend of mine, who died from alcoholism a few years ago. All the men I never married, number 19. Your job was drinking. It was the chore you assigned yourself each night. A few cans with us, then taking 3 or 4 to bed while you listened to music on your headphones. You drank steadily and well, and if we ever remarked on the crushed cans pressed like black and golden flowers beneath your bed, it was never in your hearing. Eventually, you moved out, got yourself a flat, and so the last time I saw you, it was summer. You were sunbathing on the slag bank, your chest and arms covered in an angry rash. I knew it was you because of the cans, scattered like spore around your tent. I didn't recognize your eyes, the way you moved. You'd been sleeping outside for days, told me the stars were beautiful up here. Here, you'd say, reaching out to almost touch me on the arm, ready to launch into another of your stories about your neighbour or someone you'd met on the street. Here, you say, speaking now though you're long gone, stretching out the word so it becomes 2 syllables. Ear, moving forward on your chair, repeating the word over and over until I turn to you and listen. The police appear in this one as well. This I wrote after an ex-boyfriend tried to add me on Facebook, and I thought, I'm not friending you on Facebook. You were a complete stalker. And I thought it was fun. I look back at this kind of stalking incident that happened to me when I was 17, and I was laughing about it to myself. So that's why the poem's got this kind of nursery rhyme rhythm and the rhyme scheme, because I was thinking this is a funny story. And it wasn't until I wrote it out and read it, tried it out at an open mic and realized actually this is really dark. But I think that habit of minimizing or laughing about sexism or trauma or violence is a coping strategy that probably lots of people also use. So this is All the Men I Never Married, number 23. It didn't really help, the story of Othello and Desdemona and Iago and poison in the ear. And though our teacher taught us about poor Desdemona, bad Iago, Othello escaped almost blame-free, possessed by jealousy, driven into a state. So when my ex became my stalker, all the boys in class ignored me. In every lesson, he looked through me until the evenings when he was drunk and in a nightclub, and then he'd ring and start to cry and try to find out where I was or where I'd been, asking why I wouldn't listen, why I'd stopped picking up the phone. Sometimes I answered it with silence, imagined him alone, listening to my nothing. That year of A-levels, I got myself a stalker, and the police said, "Aren't you flattered?" In the station, there was laughter at the 40 phone calls every day for weeks. He said that I'd agreed to be with him forever, and then I'd changed my mind. What could he do but become my stalker and wait till darkness fell and slash my father's tyres, or call fire engines to my house so there was nothing catching fire? When my ex became my stalker, he convinced my mum to let him in, then locked himself inside the bathroom. It felt like I'd let him win, even though it finished with him in a police cell because of texts he'd sent with threats and words like kill and guess what happens next. And so the police kept him overnight to think about his actions and rang his mother, who had no idea how any of this happened. And my final poem, skipping over, is I was trying to write about sexism that isn't always black and white as well, because I think sometimes the people we most admire and most love can also perform sexism because we live in a system that perpetuates it. And this is about a really inspirational tutor that I met. I was lucky enough to be on a course with when I was just starting out as a writer. And I was trying to think about who gives us permission to write and what we're given permission to write or not write about. So this is All the Men I Never Married, number 48. This is the last poem. When he told me not to tell the story of my mother's hair, I was obedient for many years, until I saw the video of wild horses in Patagonia, tamed by increments over many days, the gaucho calm and still when the horse met his gaze, then shooing it as it looks away. And so the horse learns that only when it gives its whole attention to this man will it ever feel peace again. And of course my mother is not a horse. She would never be fooled by such a trick. But maybe the man who told me not to tell is the gaucho. Maybe once I was a horse, to spend all these years listening to his voice. He told me this was women's business, that the world was not interested in such things. He said, listen to me read Eliot until you fall asleep or until the red wine runs out. And so we did, all of us who had gathered there to learn. He stood in front of the curved window. The bats crisscrossed the lawn. He did not hold a book or open his eyes to see if we were there. The room took his voice and gave it back to every corner. It felt as if he whispered in my ear. I have held my tongue for years. My mother's hair. I did as I was told. She sat for hours between my legs as if she was the child and I the mother. I straightened her hair, every curl and kink, dividing it into smaller and smaller sections. The hiss of steam, the TV in the background, my father elsewhere, and part of me still there, part of me in the library with the man who told me not to speak about such things. The lawn, the drifting dusk, the bats, my mother's hair, my hands, that house, the shudder of a horse's flank.
Thank you, Kim, for that brilliant, witty and insightful reading. And we're now into our last 10 minutes, so without more ado, we're going to move to the Q&A section. So, Inez, if you can bring Kim and Polly up to spotlight size, that's great. I have a first question for Polly. Polly, would you talk a little more about the bear? It's only natural for a bear to growl a little. And that is from Alison Critchlow.
Yeah, no. I'm just going to move the camera so you can't see Will smirking in the background either. No, I can't really talk about the bear. All I will say is that the bear was real, but the bear's identity needs to be protected.
Sorry.
Very good. Okay, let's leave the pictures up equally, Inez, if you don't mind.
I love the fact that, Kim, your reading ended with a man in a library as well. There was something really, really beautiful about that.
Kim, I have a question for you while we wait for our audience to find the Ask a Question box, which is at the bottom right of your screen. So please do ask a question. But I've got one for you, Kim, which is one of the things that's really striking in this collection, which is, as I said, is funny and witty and insightful, not to say incisive. And but there's also an acknowledgement that desire is a very powerful thing. And I wondered if you'd just speak to that a little.
Yeah, it's funny because the desire poems are always the ones that I'm the most nervous about reading. It's easier on screen, actually, because I'm not in the same room as other people. But they're always the ones I'm much more nervous about reading than the kind of the ones that are about sexism. And I guess, I don't know, I think I have kind of like internalized misogyny about it. Like the first poem, the second poem with the "Are you surprised? Are you judging me yet?" after the list of men. I mean, that kind of like it took me a long time to realize not only was I waiting to be judged, I'd already judged myself by the use of the word "yet" on the end of the line. So for me, writing a poem is always a kind of trying to find out what I think or what I know or what I don't know. But I really like what Catherine Angel says about desire, about female desire in particular. I'm going to quote it really badly, but she basically says something like female desire is always or often kind of discovered or explored in a landscape of violence. So she talks about how they're very close, often very close together, particularly for women. And I think that's quite interesting, that kind of tension, because yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Bill, or says anything useful.
Well, it's interesting because in the Golden Man poem, I mean he has a role to play in the poem, of course, but he's also not unwelcome in the bed either. So there is that, and it's so often, the refusal to acknowledge desire can tip over a poem. But Polly, in your work, I mean, just thinking about, I mentioned your Walking Solo podcast, where you've arrived in Lancaster, but it's not where you want to be, and you're walking north. Are you now where you want to be? And was it an intentional thing to get the landscape of the sort of the centre of the Lake District into your poems, or is it just something that's come there almost by osmosis?
Well, I always say I kind of moved to the Lake District by accident, which is really true in a way, that I came up here because I applied for a PhD and really had no intention of leaving London before that. So I'd been living in East London for 7 years since I left home. And but Lancaster played this strange role for me because it was always a stopgap, that I moved up knowing that I had to live in Grasmere to do the research that I was doing. That was always part of my PhD process. So I had this kind of 9 months in Lancaster beforehand. There was a kind of strange I think of it almost like a holding pen or an airlock before I moved up here. But it was also the first time I'd ever lived alone as an adult, or lived alone full stop as well. So it was a really special time for me as well, where I got to recalibrate myself and learn how to be in a really different space. So all of it really happened by accident. And I never would have imagined when I was in my mid-20s that this is where I'd be. But yeah, it is the place I'd like to stay if it's possible. But it's very hard to live in the Lake District. So yeah, who knows what the future holds.
Thank you. Kim says, Anchor, your work has so much depth. Clearly you spend a lot of time reflecting on yourself. Could you say a bit more about how you experience yourself now, since all these men are in the past? I'm sorry if this question is too personal. If it is, just ignore it.
Yeah, I don't. Well, I should hasten to add that all of the men in the book are not necessarily, they're kind of composites often. So they're kind of, a lot of them are based on real people, but sometimes some lucky man has like 10 poems about him, but it's made out in the book like it's 10 different men. And so I'm kind of playing around with truth, as we all do in poems. And I don't know about how I experience myself now. I think before, a lot of the men that I'm kind of writing, or that past that I'm writing about, I wouldn't have called myself a feminist. I wouldn't have known what feminism was. I wouldn't really have understood what sexism was, not an intellectual and way of being able to articulate it, but at a bodily level, I definitely knew what it was. So I guess now I'm more aware, and it doesn't mean that I don't still experience sexism, but when my PhD was about writing about sexism, and often I would then experience it because I was talking about it. But instead of getting upset, I would immediately just think, yes, I can write 3,000 words about that encounter. So it made it actually, I guess now I feel better able to cope with it. And and I have fun thinking about it and thinking about my own reaction to it rather than immediately getting upset. I still get upset though, I still get angry, but...
Thank you. Now one for you, Polly, this one from Inga Milful. I think Polly said she was using Lancashire lore, L-O-R-E, by the way, in one of the poems. If I understood that right, could she say a bit more about that, both about the source material and how she approached it?
Yeah, it was actually Cumbrian, not Lancashire. So it's the Boggles poem, I think, that you're referring to. I used a map by a writer called Alan Cleaver, who is he's on Twitter as the Lonnings Man, Lonnings guy. Even had to ask my researcher in the background there, and so you can find him there. And he did a Google map of all the boggles in Cumbria that he could find reference to. So all these kind of boggles are kind of like ghosts, but they're more complicated than that as well, because they can be something just like a bad feeling in a place, which is what I love about them. They're really complicated kinds of hauntings, and I just love that collection of them so much. I had to write about it.
Thank you. And we've got time for just one more, and this is from Elizabeth. I really admire that Kim has overcome her tutor's advice, in inverted commas, to not talk about certain things. Have you any advice for overcoming the fear of writing about personal matters or subjects which we are told not to discuss?
Oh, Elizabeth, you know, it took me probably 15 years to write that poem, that last poem, and to get over that advice. So yeah, it took me 15 years to get over that, but it always kind of played in the back of my mind. Again, I think these moments, it's not that I was traumatized by it, but it was obviously quite a powerful message. And it was only when when Rachel, I was part of a judging panel that shortlisted the poet Rachel Long for the Forward Prize for Best First Collection. And she has loads of poems about hair in that book. And obviously I had this voice saying, you know, you don't write about women's hair. It's not important. It's not interesting. And then there's Rachel Long writing this amazing poetry about this thing I'd been told not to write about. Her work is actually about black women's hair, which is another whole you know, is slightly different take on it. But I found that really inspiring, and I thought, well, if Rachel kind of gave me permission to do it, and I had a conversation with Rachel about who are our permission givers in poetry, and I put a tweet on Twitter which Polly answered, and I said, what have you been told not to write about in poetry? And I'm just actually collating all the responses today for a workshop that I'm going to run. And Polly replied with some answers as well. I don't know if you remember that, Polly, but 90% of the people that replied were women, saying we've been told not to write about basically anything to do with being a woman, like the body, illness, the self, pregnancy, childbirth, hair, blah, blah, blah. And there were a few men that replied, but overwhelmingly women. So if I have any advice, it is to find your permission givers and read them. People, you know, mine were like Pascal Petit, Vicky Fever, and then Rachel Long more recently. And then just kind of just go for it, because you can write it and then decide what you're going to do with the work afterwards. You don't have to kind of bare your soul in public straight away. But the important thing, I think, is to write it if you want to write it.
That's great. And I'm afraid that that's also all we have time for. So thank you, Polly and Kim, for those exceptional readings and for answering the questions of the audience, all our questions, so generously. Now, although we can't offer our audience a book signing with a glass of wine, you can buy Polly and Kim's new books, Much with Body and All the Men I Never Married, complete with a signed bookplate, direct from our online bookshop, and you can support Litfest at the same time. And before we all go our separate ways, if you enjoyed today's event, don't forget to click on the donate button on your screen or go to our website later if that's easier. Every penny will go towards creating exciting future projects and events and strengthening Litfest as an independent arts charity. Thank you for joining us today. I hope we'll see some of you again soon at some of the future events, especially Karen Lloyd's nature writing event tomorrow at 11:30, and the 2 international fiction events, the International Book Club discussion with outstanding Colombian writer Juan Gabriel Vasquez and his translator, the award-winning Anne MacLean, and finally the first Lancaster International Fiction Lecture, Fiction as News, which will be given on Tuesday the 12th at 7:30 by Juan Gabriel Vasquez. But now it really is time to go, so please join me in thanking once again tonight's wonderful poets Polly Atkin and Kim Moore.
Thank you.
There are nice messages coming up saying things like applause, applause to 2 excellent poets, both new to me and a brave and patient host. I wasn't that brave, but thank you to the poets. And I hope we'll see you all again soon. Bye now.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, Bill. I'm just basking in all the comments now.
You do that. We'll download them for you. Don't worry. Okay, Inez, I think it's time to go.